I won't be able to get through the whole PowerPoint, or we're going to do it very fast. And I think I'm going to first try to make a resume about what I want to talk about, and then we will see where we get. But then at least, so that's the whole construction. And then we have a scheme that everybody will be able to follow. And then otherwise maybe I get lost. And then we have a structure where we're going to. So, in fact, pre-modern there was not a split. Let's call it just pre-modern. And then, so modernity starts, in fact, with the split between social sciences and natural sciences. And I will explain there what happened there, how that comes. And so natural sciences. We can call it like this is what they call alpha, and this is beta sciences. And in fact, through the times, and Bruno Latour talks a lot about that. In fact, the philosophy of science through the ages, and certainly in the 20th century, have always tried to split these two more and more away from each other. So they got more and more away from each other. And my thesis is my research that, in fact, art philosophy got influenced by this mentality of splitting. And so art philosophy also started to develop a philosophy about art is about art. Art is like a quality, a culture in itself. And that's got completely realized in its own white cube, in fact, as a kind of symbol for it, the white cube. Bruno Latour says that, in fact, after a certain moment of really trying to split these two things, and what are these two things? The one is the natural sciences. They study nature, the laws of nature, animals and objects. And the social sciences, that's all what's concerning all two human things, all the society, politics, ethics, everything where you cannot really trace the right rules. At one moment, postmodernity actually, in this split, in trying to really separate these two from each other, postmodernism is in fact giving up, trying to split, and in spreading the two legs, jumping to one side, and it chooses the side of the social sciences. Like someone like Derrida, who says that I don't trust technology, I don't expect anything good coming from that side. So he starts deconstructing texts, and it's producing texts about texts, and it's never going back, in fact, to what's happening in real life, in nature. So it's interpretation of text. So until postmodernity, so here you get a split. And that is what happens also in art, that finally art gives up defining its own essence and says like, well, we are art, and we stay doing art, and we stay in this white cube. And then, of course, you get some kind of boredom in it, and all kind of discussions like what people do then in there. And then until, in fact, and it's quite around the turn of the millennium, in fact from the 70s it starts, but then you see from the turn of the millennium really this discussion of going outside to the external, and then you see a split into two. You see a split into in social art, which is like a participatory art, let's call it. Can you read it now? Yeah? And art science, or media art. Which is funny is that, in fact, the split of the two or the three cultures reproduces itself within the art scene. Because, in fact, those two are quite separated. Most of this social art is not about is about communication, and is not about technology. And the art science, most of it, I don't say everything, but so I'm going to talk very cliché now, is into technology and so, but it's not so much accepted by the traditional art, but it still wants to be accepted by it, and it will produce a lot of art that looks a little bit like minimalistic art also, but then more with the particle effects on top of it. To say it very pejorative, this is a cliche, but what I mean is that it's not so much with the social thing. So you can see quite a split between those three. In the meantime, in fact, the natural sciences have continued to develop. And it has continued to develop until certainly in around the turn of the millennium. That's what this documentary Technocalypse is about these new technological developments. Well, they call it the Converging Technologies, nanotechnology, nano, NBIC it's called. NBIC, and that stands for Nano, Bio, Informational, so like computers and artificial intelligence, and cognitive brain research. So those four are at this moment combining, converging together, like you can say, like in a brain implant. A brain implant, you have to know biology, you have to know the brain, you have to know a computer, the chip, and all making it very tiny. It all converges into nanotechnology. So these are the four that at this moment become and produce a lot of ethical debates finally. So suddenly, after this starts, like in certainly 1700 until now, you have had the mentality of the split of these two, and suddenly the sciences. Think of in '96 the cloning of the sheep dolly. In '99, I believe that the stem cell research suddenly caused also a big debate. And then all the rest came at the beginning of the new millennium, like the human genome was mapped in 2002 or 2003. The American Scientific, in '98, they still ridiculized the idea of nanotechnology. In 2001, they had a special issue, a special number of the magazine on nanotechnology because they couldn't avoid it anymore because the first products came on the market. And so you see that suddenly all these things, more and more every day, you see new developments in this technology. And it's always triggering our ethical side. So suddenly here, it becomes a center of the discussion of the social sciences. At the same time, and more, we have in the social problems with global warming, we have these issues of how to organize a society. It's important to understand technology. So it's now an issue like we need to go to renewable technologies and so. These two, in fact, they become quite intertwined. There's in fact a tension between the mentality of transhumanism and all the science that can solve all our problems, and on the other hand that we are slowly facing the end of human civilization when the oil peak, so the oil is now diminishing, and it's possible that the whole world economy will collapse within this and 2 decades. So this becomes very important. I will show the graphics about that. This means that it really is asking for a completely new rethinking way of our society. How are we going to organize when this type of economy and the pollution of it will collapse? And another thing is another social movement or system that is now growing is a peer-to-peer society, with also new technologies and with 3D prints and with the whole sharing idea. These things come together. And this is what I want to talk about. And then what is the position of art here? And how can art finally be connected to that? Or will it remain completely isolated? Will it just stay and do the things that it's doing, and become, in fact, a little bit outside of what's obsolete within, in fact, the civilization evolution, or will it somehow participate in it? And in this, what's happening here, and the combination of these two, learning how to create a society and combined with technology, that's where I see that things are evolving, and that the three finally are connecting with each other. The last thing that I want to talk about then is that, in fact, you get three classic institutions, yeah, that resolves from that, which is the state government, which is the university or knowledge structure, and a museum. And for these three, so you have in this technology, you have the evolution of big companies, or the peer-to-peer society, the Uber and the Facebook and whatever, against the peer-to-peer society, or you have the multinational structures, and you have the neoliberal or even libertarian transhuman mentality on the one hand, neoliberal I will call it, who wants to reduce the state except for some protection for patents and safety. And on the other hand, you have the peer-to-peer movement, which also is putting into question this state, because it's kind of new kind of communities that start. But it's important to me, I think, that the state remains for a certain period of time at least, to ensure that this can develop before this collapses, before the capitalist society collapses. And so they're reducing this, they are in fact reducing it, but how is the position? Same thing with here, in how far is the university working with the market, and in how far is it collaborating with the do-it-yourself societies that are developing? And the same thing in how far is a museum trying to survive thanks to the art market, that it wants to support these new developments happening in the connection with science and society that in fact are growing here. So these are my thoughts, and so in fact now you know everything, except that I'm working at this moment on another documentary where I was thinking, like, how can the art world connect to these things, to this science and so and to this society. And then I thought, I'm gonna go and look how the other side is doing it. So I went to look how the social sciences and the natural sciences are at this moment collaborating with each other. How do they do it, and what can we learn from it? And so in fact they don't collaborate, but the more and more they are obliged, but most of it is ethical commissions and so, who read dossiers about the researchers. There's only one type of social scientists, and that's midstream modulation. And these are people who really want to go for a couple of months to stay within the laboratory and observe and participate in the research, to try really by themselves to understand what are the practical problems and what are the problems that we face with this particular technology. And for me that was interesting, because then you have this unity of action, the Aristotelian unity of space and time, where you have the social scientists and the natural scientists together in a clash. And so I thought to learn from it, and I was a little bit disappointed, because in fact it's very difficult to work. In fact, there have been other attempts to do it, for example. So this kind of reflection, it starts already, of course, with the nuclear power after the Second World War, but very little. And then with the mapping of the human genome, that there was a big press conference in '89, where they were announcing that this would be the biggest enterprise in science ever, in 10 years, with hundreds of laboratories to map the human genome. And then there was one journalist who asked them yeah, but what about the ethical issues about that? And then there was Watson who discovered the DNA, who was also there in the team, and he was leading the team. And he said, we will put a man on the job. And they took him serious. And from that moment on, the bioscientists who were doing this research in human genomics, they were obliged to spend 3 to 5% of their budget to this ethical, juridical, and legal aspects. It's called ELSI, and in Europe, ELSA. ELSI as or well, one of both is in the States, the other one is in Europe. But what happened then is that, okay, they had a budget, and they asked somebody from the social sciences, like okay, we have a vacature here, can somebody come? And then these people come, and then finally, of course, because they were paid, they become then the PR person of these laboratories in the most of the time. And so it was announced by Paul Rabinoff, one of the social scientists who's doing this research that I've been researching now, this midstream modulation. He says that LC is dead, was the title of one of his articles. Because it doesn't function. Because, in fact, somebody who had to be critical becomes then your PR person. So they try to have somebody from the outside who comes inside the laboratory and works and follows and tries to, with these people, in fact, to trigger their own thinking about the ethical aspects of it. And maybe to some extent it works, and so. But of course, if this would really work, and you would have all laboratories collaborating, that it would be obligatory to have such a social scientist who comes from the outside always, it would not work anymore, because you would have the problem of course, spying on their research, because who are these people coming in everywhere? That's the other issue, of course, when it's also collapsing. So this is a patent system. Certainly, when you have this do-it-yourself, peer-to-peer, open source society that's coming up. So that's the whole thing. I'm going to try to illustrate this a little bit with some of my PowerPoint. In fact, the split. So, how did this split occur? And in fact, it's in Europe that this split happened, and it started, in fact, with the printing system. The printing system is, after money, it's the second mass production that happened in the world, because at that moment it was possible to mass produce also books, but also the Bible, and that's the origin of the discussion finally in Europe of the 30 Years' War that happened 200 years later. The things evolved very slow at that time. But so that people could read the Bible finally by themselves. It's not the Pope anymore and some other people who have access to the Bible, but everybody can read the Bible. And so people are getting their own thoughts, and you get Protestantism. And this is 30 Years' War in Europe that started as a conflict between Protestants and Catholics. And finally, it was a civil war of everyone against everyone. At certain countries, half of the population died. And it's one of the most ugly wars ever, apparently, in human history. So it was extremely hard, and the people who certainly had to fear for their lives were the scientists. So the scientists, this is the Royal Society. When they started in England, it was the first union, in fact, of scientists. And in their declaration, they say, the business and design of the Royal Society is to improve the knowledge of natural things and all useful arts, manufactures, mechanics, practices, engines, and inventions by experiments, not meddling with divinity, metaphysics, morals, or politics. So all these things, metaphysics, morals, politics, we have nothing to do with that. So all your discussions, all your fights, and so we just observe human nature, and we try to find out the laws of human nature. So this becomes a split. So finally, all these people who are involved with this ethics and politics and theology and so, they will finally form then the second part of the university, the social sciences. The person who then really started to organize this is Immanuel Kant, and he wrote this three critiques, three books, the reine Vernunft, praktische Vernunft, and Urteilskraft. And he really made there, in fact, three books where he defines completely what can we know of what's the structure, what's the framework in which we can have the knowledge, pure knowledge of which is becomes the Bible of the natural sciences. Of ethical sciences, and then also Urteilskraft is, in fact, it's not the whole book, it's half of the book that's really about basic theories about what is aesthetics as a third way of knowledge that's completely different than the two other ones. So he was proud that he figured out that there are three kinds of knowledge, and these are the three. And then that's in fact the start of modern art that I want to show how this influenced a lot of art critics. Finally, Kant, they will all refer to him. So at the beginning of this modernism, in fact, you have a kind of outburst of social art and of technology art, it seems. But it's like some art that appeared for a certain period, like a long wave goodbye. That it will take distance from it afterwards. Like, well, Impressionism, you know that it was based also on optics, and so it tried to give the light. This is Futurism was influenced a lot by film, also Cubism. There is a book written about how Braque and Picasso were completely crazy about film. Some of their Cubist paintings, you have the tickets of films that they went to watch. And Picasso said that the eyes of his Demoiselle d'Avignon were based on Buster Keaton's eyes. And also in Russia, in the suprematists, they were completely influenced by Tsiolkovsky, and who was influenced by Fedorov, who was a kind of mystic philosopher who said that it's human destiny to become one with God by colonizing the universe, and this has influenced a lot of modern art in Russia. Like this Malevich is in fact the moon and the earth with a kind of starship. This thing of Chasnik is very funny because that's This is a recent picture of the International Space Station, and that's a painting from 25. So I'm going to be short. So Boris Groys says that in fact, this modernity. At that moment they embrace this kind of new world, this new technology, and so. But he says it's just finally to get rid of it, to control it by aestheticizing it. Malevich in fact hated the futurists, the Italian futurists, and so that's why in fact he organized at this exhibition, the last futurist exhibition. So from that moment he called himself a suprematist, and so he had nothing to do with it. So he didn't want this kind of a machine art. He wanted to have art machines, so to produce art and not technology. Tetlin's bird that looks like a Ponomarenko one in 29 was made in fact not to fly, and also his monument for the Third International, he wanted that it would never turn, while this was always talked about it, that it would turn around. This foundation of science, maybe I have to go, I don't know what time it is, so I should go short through it. In fact, because of all these things that happened with the First World War, fraud, that in fact the unconsciousness is influencing our behavior, relativity and quantum mechanics, and so there were a lot of crises in the human society around that time. Ludwig Wittgenstein and the Vienna Circle, the Wiener Kreis, they decided, okay, we have to make clear rules about what is technology. They call them also the neo-Kantians. So they really go back to Kant and they say, this is the way that we can have knowledge: empiricism, so observation, and logics. And all the rest, metaphysics, ethics, and ethics is in fact pie in the sky. It's something you cannot talk about. This has influenced, with the Second World War, these people, most of these people were Jewish and they had to flee from Germany and Austria, and they have influenced a lot of the philosophy in the United States. They've been very, very influential there. They've influenced also the art critics. Clement Greenberg, the big art critic, he said that Kant was the first modern artist. He said Kant is the first one who really has been researching the foundation of his own medium, and which medium was philosophy. So he figured out what's the framework of his own philosophy. And that's what he wanted also for other artists to do. So to do the research of what's the essence of your own art. And so they're debating about, together with his big concurrent Rosenberg, like what is the real essence of all this new art. The funny thing is that Greenberg, for example, he would that's an anecdote that in an exhibition he would go and measure if the paint of a painting was too thick. When it was more, I don't know, more than a centimeter or so, he said, like, that's not good art because it's not the essence of painting. It's not two-dimensional. It goes more to sculpture. And this kind of mentality of going to the essence of science, going to the essence of the foundations of art, has continued, and always based on this neo-Kantian philosophy. Certainly, Joseph Kosuth, who wrote in the 60s his famous manifest or article about art after philosophy, where he really refers to all these people, and where he really refers to art should just be also like the sciences, and art is logic. And in that sense, art is about art. And so it has nothing to do with the external world. I'm going to continue because this is concerning art, and then in science, slowly, then around the 60s, people start to realize within the sciences that in fact this foundation, it's impossible. Something like observation, you cannot have real a foundation based on observation, because observation, you can fool yourself with I see some kind of a weird form and I think it's a dead cat, but it can be just some dust. I'm not going to go further in it, but these are people who are non-stop breaking down finally that in fact there is no real foundation. There's not a final foundation that you can found all your knowledge on. Finally, it's an agreement between people. And this is also what happens around the same time in art, that in fact it doesn't make sense to have a foundation of art. And so Tuva Danto is going to say, like, art is that anything goes, and then so from now on, art is philosophy. It's going to be thinking about what's the function of art. And so you have all these people who express this idea in all their ways. Manzoni with his Kant shit, and John Cage with the silence, Yves Klein with an empty space, Ben Vautier, nichts ist Kunst. So it's all the same mentality around that period of the 0 point, in fact, of art. So I'm going to try to explain what is in fact this mentality between those two. It started, in fact, with the C.P. Snow, who he made a very famous lecture in 1957. Which is really the thing that's still discussed today, where he said it's such a pity that these two worlds are two different separated worlds. He was a scientist, but also a science fiction writer, and at night he would go to bars with writers, and during the day was working with scientists, and he discovered that these people have absolutely nothing to do with each other. So he says, I don't know here also, who doesn't know Romeo and Juliet of Shakespeare? Who knows? Who knows it? Everyone, I guess. Who knows the second law of thermodynamics? Someone knows? Ah, yes. Who? How many people? He says that for a scientist, in fact, this is as obvious as for a cultural person to know what Romeo and Juliet is, because it's one of the absolute foundations in science. And in fact, he says it's absurd that all these cultural people, they think that they can talk about their society, but in fact they didn't go further than the agrarian culture. So for everybody who's constructing a machine, a steam engine also has to know absolutely the second law of thermodynamics. It's about entropy, so that energy divides. But Bruno Latour really then makes a systematic difference in what is the problem with it. So natural sciences, they observe nature and they consider everything as objects or animals or so, and everything in society that's about humans. But this is, in our society, it's not possible anymore, because when you have an ear mouse, or when you have the mice that the transgenic mice that they work now, full with human DNA, when you have implants, when you so what is machine, what is human but it's more than that. It's also like when you have something like AIDS, how to solve AIDS. You have virologists, you have people who are researching immunology, and so how to get to a medicine. But that's not the only thing. The other thing is also you have to know the culture of the people when in Africa there are medicine men who said that the gods don't want you to use condoms, then you have a problem. Then you have to admit that these gods exist. A positivist would say, are you crazy? Gods don't exist, we don't talk about gods. But he says you have to accept them in some kind of, they exist, because they have an influence on this world. So these things are, we have never been modern, he says. These things are there. They're influencing on us non-stop. A piece of art is in fact the most beautiful example of such a hybrid. When the urinoir of Duchamp, it's a very important thing that caused a lot of debate, this object. So a lot of people discuss about the function, if it's art or not. So pieces of art have been destroyed because people hate it. So they have they talk in this world. Other problems is that historians, all history that we know is history about man, famous man. But in fact, most history is about hunger and viruses that killed. So, like, who's going to now explain the history of Africa and Ebola, and so how it ruined economies? So, but these things historians never talk about because that's not their part. That's not their job. So he says we have to completely reinvent how science works. How these things are connecting to each other. This is a very nice example, for example. These are robots in the West. Yeah? Now I'm going to show you, these are robots in the East. In the West, a robot cannot have a consciousness. It cannot have feelings. It cannot not have, it is an object. Yeah? It's an object to use. And in the East, they didn't have this separation. So, well, and this is a little bit the same that I'm saying here about the social needs for the moment is to find out is a need for technology to solve the problems, and the same thing is to solve the scientific problems. You need also cultural things to be able to solve your problems. How did it go further with art? Very quick. I don't know. How long can I still talk? 15 minutes. Yeah. In fact, so art finally, after the death of art, it stays in this white cube, and from that moment on, there have been a lot of discussions what to do, and one of the iconic ones is the difference between Beuys and Warhol with their mentality. So being good in business is the most fascinating kind of art. Warhol. So Warhol expresses a lot of cynicism so with these Brillo boxes, somebody like Greenberg got totally tilt. He cannot measure the thickness of the painting, because is this now the essence of painting? Is this the essence of sculpture? It has absolutely nothing to do. This thing has completely confused Greenberg. Even in his memoirs, he said that from that moment on, I was totally lost. So Joseph Beuys is also joking, in fact, with that when he says Kunst ist Kapital. But in fact, what he means is the opposite. He says it's the art that is of capital importance. It's not the money. For Warhol, it's the opposite. And in fact, this mentality, since then, in fact, there are the two iconic of two mentalities that within the art world have been existed within this white cube. In fact, sometimes when I see a group exhibition of people who accepts the white cube and who accepts, in fact, like, let's just continue art not reflecting on the position. And so I see it a little bit as paradise birds. And this Konrad Lorenz, who's an ornithologist who's studying birds, he once said about the paradise birds, in fact, they are all completely different from the outside, but in fact, from the inside, they're completely the same. When you take away the feathers, then they look all like that chicken. They have the same intestines and the same system. So he said we have to observe the outside because there's a difference. But I say no. The problem with me when you have this kind of exhibitions of art that doesn't reflect upon its own position, also, it's just beautiful paradise birds. Extrapolating the idea of neoliberalism, the idea of United Colors of Benetton or freedom of speech. And that's how it has been used later. This guy, Richard Florida, with his book, The Rise of Creative Class, in fact, he did a lot of horrible things with that book, because he talks about the creative class. So from that moment, there's no art anymore, but there's a creative class. And what he says is, so he uses art that now that it doesn't say anything, so it doesn't have a social influence and so anymore. So we can start using it for urbanistic and touristic purposes. So he says for a city to attract people to become economically to live up, there are two kind of people that you need. You need artists and you need homosexuals. Because when you have these people, then they will create some kind of buzz. Things are happening. Your city becomes cool, and that finally will attract other people and other economies, certainly new creative economies, because they want at night they want some kind of joy where things happen. And Amsterdam is a good example of a city that really understood that. So they have their gay pride and they have broedplaatsen, places where cheap people can live, because otherwise artists wouldn't be able to survive. Certainly not now anymore without subsidies. And so, but most of these places for cheap ateliers and so are taken by bike makers and all kind of other designers and so because we are all creative class, so it's not about art anymore. And so he created there this leveling of everybody is now in this neoliberal market, and we do this for pushing up the city. And that's where, quite based on him, we have all these biennales and so of all these cities booming that they want to participate in becoming an interesting city. Somebody like Pascal Gielen again, and so he talks about the situation now of artists used as some kind of model for a neoliberal economy. So you have no fixed hours, you have no fixed contract, you have no social security and so, but you're creative, you're free. And that idea is used for new economy, and but he says, so with this mentality of bringing, so coming into these cities in these biennales, so you are in the market now. Use that megaphone, because in most of these biennales, in fact, I experience it sometimes like a kind of looking for Eastern eggs, but then for adults also. That you have your map and then you walk around and this must certainly be a piece of art. But in fact, it's just some kind of, it looks like an Eastern egg. So, and that has changed, and that is changed now because most of curators realize that in fact they don't want to participate in this tourist system anymore, and they really start using these biennales like, let's create a megaphone of it. So, and that's totally changing now. But what I want to say is, so it evolved within this cube. In fact, you can say I see some mentalities within it, and so you can say in this cube on the one hand. So this, like say, these paradise birds are this formalist. So not reflecting on the situation within the white cube, and then you have other poles. You have the cynicist pole. Let's say here, and these are people that I think are quite fitting that mentality, like it's all this kind of commercial business, and we joke about it, but we really show it. And in fact, maybe they're the most honest in showing how the system is used, how the art market is, in fact, reducing art to just a system. And on the other hand, you have then the people who really are not happy with it and who feel this their work is about the loss of this the big history of art, and so it evaporates this melancholic mentality of loss. And then, of course, you have several other ones. You have this is, of course, one of the first. Like when art is dead, then long live the artist. So let's say that this is so the centered, so the body art, and like Jan Hoot calls it the individual mythologies. And then you have other ones like this is, in fact, these are some artists that how I interpret it. In fact, they are playing with the border, with the transition, like Marcel Duchamp with his ready-mades. He says, what I do is I take an object and I transfer it to the planet of art. And in fact, that's the system of how art works. In fact, you bring things to the art world, and this is thematizing that. And I think Joëlle Tuurlings is one of the most interesting people for me in that sense, in the fact that she some kind of serves in the world of things. So she collects things in a way that it becomes her own manic attitude, like somebody would surf on the internet, or so she surfs like that in the world, and it's a machine of bringing these things into the art world. And then we get slowly we get really the discussion then about really going outside of this white cube. Nicolas Bourriot talked in the 90s about, he had an article about relational art that was within this art world, like, there is something happening. Finally, there is like an escape in this discussion about the artists within this white cube. And so Dirkrit Tiravania is one of these people. So he says, these are people who just create an opening, a show where people can meet each other. So it's not about the artist anymore. In fact, the artist is on the background. He creates an atmosphere so that people can communicate with each other. It is, so of course, this is the 90s, the beginning of the internet, and so this kind of things reflecting on that. Claire Bishop really attacks that. And one of the examples that she gives is one of these exhibitions of Tiravania. There was also, what's his name now? Haller? Huller, Kirsten Huller, who did such who's also considered as one of these people from Relational Art, who organized in the Atomium a meeting where people could for one day really step out of their own identity, like King Baudouin did when he didn't want to sign the abortion law. One day, and so he created this thing. So it was just a gathering of like 100 people within one of the balls of the Atomium. So it's creating a kind of concept for people to meet. Claire Bishop attacks that completely. She says that in fact this is in fact small bourgeois of the in-crowd of these things. And she gives an example of a gallery in New York where Tiravania would organize such a meeting where he makes food like always. And there were some homeless people who discovered that, and they came in, and immediately some guards took them and throw them out because this is not for you, which is of course then not the point. Sorry? Okay, we can talk about it later. I try to really quick go. So she attacks it, and she gives us as an example other people like Santiago Sierra, who that's for her. She calls it antagonist art, where you really provoke in the social injustice of the world, like some immigrants who have to hold this huge thing. The funny thing is that these people are mostly also referring to minimal art and so, but using then a total social context. This thing of a Gianomotti I like also very much is this block. It's like a very small piece of minimal art or so, but it's in fact soap, and apparently is a friend of a surgeon in Switzerland who did liposuction on Berlusconi. And he gathered the fat of Berlusconi and turned it into a piece of soap. He calls it a manipulite. So I like this so it's like minimal art, but then it jumps completely to the outside in a social critic. But then, this is a system. So finally we have then really the split of these two, like art and science and participatory art, which is mostly funny but or social. Interesting, but it doesn't have this creation of a community like what's going on. It's in this peer-to-peer, and so thanks to the new technologies. And so when this Claire Bishop attacks this relational art, then I say, well, but this is art in fact where the artist is still the center, and in fact in some cases like Santiago Sierra is a horrible power game of the artist as the center who decides to do this with his immigrants. So it's not, in fact what they do is a start of trying to build communities. Maybe within the context, I'm going to skip now because we cannot go there. I'm going to skip my 3 minutes. This is I did research. I followed the 3 labs. One lab is about the brain implants. And like this woman, she had well, you see, very hard depression, or so one of the worst. Very final, so she got an implant, but then finally they discovered that she started to do shoppings in a maniac way, and so they discovered that her voltage was probably too high, and then I organized with them a meeting, but then finally I was pushed out also with my social scientist. They wanted to organize the whole thing. The problem is then the responsibility. So because there's no law in it, so they say, okay, we can pay the ticket of that woman when she does the shoppings that she doesn't want, because we didn't manage to put the voltage right on the brain implant, and then so they. But the problem, that's okay, you can pay the ticket still when it's, but imagine that somebody commits a murder and he says, sorry, but somebody else is controlling the buttons here, then who's responsible? So we organized a congress also with a jurist, a judge in it, who was moderating, is there. And but finally they pushed me out in the organization, and in fact they were organizing it to really make a proposal for a law where they distanciate themselves completely from the responsibility, where finally he had to say, the judge, like, in fact I'm the only one here who's going to take position for the patient, because I think somebody has to protect their rights also. So I think it's necessary to have this kind of social discussion. This is another group of people with synthetic biology that I followed, and with social scientists. In fact, they never listened to him, and so he wanted to help them. But then finally it turned out that without our noticing it, they had in in a contest, organized a debate by themselves, but it was a whole setup. And so between these teams, it's a world championship of synthetic biology, but it's set up, and finally they won. And we didn't know about it. So we were helping them in an ethic debate. So this discussion didn't work out very well. And here this is an extremely interesting research on artificial intelligence and revolutionary theories about how the brain functions. And it's very interesting how they work with models and so. But our social scientist finally became is an American. And so we have here also Roger Penrose, who's really into that theme of these theories about the brain, who came to visit what I organized in the Brachivonte meeting about these whole new theories. And he became, in fact, the spokesman of them, because he's the only one who can speak very well English. So the problem is that they have very interesting research, but they cannot get into the magazines because their English isn't so good. Anyway, this is what I find interesting. What's happening today in science and in society. This is so the graphics of the Club of Rome about what's going to happen in the future. In fact, the resources oil is going to collapse soon. In 2006 we had the peak, the oil peak, which means this is the maximum volume that people have taken out of the ground. From now on, it's going to go downhill. Of course, they start now everywhere in the North Pole and everywhere to collect this oil. And so, but it's the end of the story. And when that story collapses, then it's the whole our whole economic system is going to collapse. Science is going to go up, and that's the mentality of transhumanists, and so it's the science is going to solve us. And maybe it is, but that's that's going to be the discussion. Will they go fast enough? So the problem is, so it's now discovered that in fact we are following completely the business as usual model. So that it's going to happen that within this 20, 30 years, there's going to be a total world economic collapse. And it's even getting worse. The problem is, like, if we can prolong for 10, 20 years still oil to get it out of the ground, also the costs are going to come more and more. Today, the new systems of getting the oil, it takes 1/3 of the energy to get the oil out of the ground. This is from global warming. These are holes in Siberia of explosions of methane, and methane is so. Yeah, I have to stop. I really have to stop. So, well, this is the discussion about how to these two systems of going further into this energy. Okay, this is it. Thank you.
Pessimist or optimist?
Really, I think. No, I don't know. In fact, there are. It's a matter of the choices that we make. If I think that there are a lot of possibilities, like really pushing the solar systems and constructing this new society, which is somebody like Michel Bouwens compares it to the collapse of the Roman Empire, where also they couldn't get all the energy sources anymore because the empire became too big and it was also collapsing, and then when the thing fell apart, people started to organize themselves in these feudal systems, and that's maybe what's happening now, and it's a matter of how these things evolve and are constructing as a kind of alternative society, and how far that these things are working, all these sharing structures that are happening now, how far these things are evolving. So when it's very possible, and that we don't have to be pessimistic at all when really all these technologies are evolving. It's really a race with the evolution, the speed of science that's happening, and the collapse of the energy resources. Like, in fact, the former crisis, everybody says it's a financial crisis, but it was 2 years before that in fact people realized that in fact it's the end of the story. The oil is going downhill from now on. But it's a matter of the choices to make. Do you want to have total asocial politics to really destroy the possibility of building these communities, and putting the hope on all the multinationals that they will create and push, but that's not the thing. That's the end of the story. But then these new technologies that are distributed. It's not. So the energies are not central big companies, but so everybody can have their solar system, and in that sense, somebody like Jeremy Rifkin says that within this and a few decades, in fact, we don't all energy sources are for free, because the investment, and it doesn't cost anything anymore. 3D printers, and so everything is going to be produced like that, and it's going to be maybe between. You're going to have a huge one generation that's going to build this. And when it's built, so you can have work for all these people in the coming generation. It can create jobs for millions of people to organize this not centralized, but all these other systems of energy. And after that, in fact, nobody has to work anymore. That's his vision. So it all can work. It all can happen. Somebody? No. Okay, thank you.